Sarah Mitchell had been having the worst week of her life. Her mother's medical bills were piling up. Her car had broken down that morning. And now, she stood in line at Patterson's pharmacy for the third time this week, waiting to pick up her elderly mother's heart medication. The prescription had been delayed twice already, and her mother couldn't afford to miss another dose. The pharmacy was busier than usual for a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah checked her watch nervously as the line moved at a snail's pace. She had already taken time off work for this, and her boss had made it clear that her frequent absences were becoming a problem. The stress was eating at her, and she could feel her patience wearing thin with each passing minute. Behind the counter, pharmacist David Chen was doing his best to handle the rush. 3 employees had called in sick, leaving him short-staffed during one of their busiest periods. He moved efficiently between customers, but the computer system had been running slowly all day, causing delays with every transaction. When Sarah finally reached the counter, she gave her mother's name and waited as David searched through the ready prescriptions. Her heart sank when he shook his head apologetically. "I'm sorry, but it looks like there was an issue with the insurance authorization," David explained. "We'll need to contact your mother's doctor to get a prior authorization form. It should be ready by tomorrow afternoon." Sarah felt her composure beginning to crack. "Tomorrow afternoon? My mother needs this medication today. She's already missed 2 doses because of delays with this prescription. I understand your frustration. But without the proper authorization, insurance won't cover the medication, and the cash price is quite expensive," David replied patiently. He had dealt with similar situations countless times and genuinely sympathized with families struggling with medical costs. Behind Sarah in line, an elderly man in a worn military-style jacket shifted impatiently. Harold Thompson had served his country for 35 years and now lived on a modest veteran's pension. He had been standing in line for 20 minutes, waiting to pick up his own medications for diabetes and blood pressure. The pain in his arthritic knees was flaring up, and he just wanted to get his prescriptions and go home. As the conversation between Sarah and the pharmacist continued, Harold's patience began to wear thin. He had heard similar complaints from other customers throughout his wait, and it seemed like everyone had some urgent reason why their prescription couldn't wait. In his military mindset, problems had solutions, and excuses were just obstacles to finding those solutions. Sarah's voice began to rise as her frustration mounted. "This is the 3rd time I've been here this week. My mother is 83 years old, and she needs this medication to keep her heart stable. What am I supposed to tell her? That the pharmacy can't get its act together?" The pharmacist remained calm and professional. "I can try calling the doctor's office now to expedite the authorization, but they may have already closed for the day. Let me see what I can do." As David picked up the phone to make the call, Sarah turned around in exasperation, her eyes filling with tears. She noticed the growing line behind her and felt even more embarrassed about causing a scene. The stress of caring for her aging mother while trying to maintain her job and pay bills had pushed her to her breaking point. Harold watched the young woman's emotional display with a mixture of sympathy and impatience. He had seen enough real crises in his military career to know that most civilian problems had straightforward solutions if people would just calm down and think logically. From his perspective, getting upset never solved anything and usually made situations worse. After waiting a few more minutes while the pharmacist made his calls, Harold decided to speak up. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command, though he intended to be helpful rather than harsh. "Miss, getting emotional isn't going to speed things up," Harold said, his tone matter-of-fact. "These folks are doing their job. Maybe if you had planned better or checked with your mother's doctor about the authorization beforehand, we wouldn't all be standing here waiting." Sarah turned around, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. She saw an elderly man in casual clothes questioning her dedication to her mother's care, and something inside her snapped. "Excuse me?" Sarah's voice rose sharply. "You have no idea what I'm dealing with. I work 2 jobs to pay for my mother's care, and I've been here 3 times this week trying to get her medication. Don't you dare suggest I'm not planning properly or that I don't care about my mother's health." Her voice carried across the pharmacy, drawing attention from other customers and staff members. The tension in the air was palpable as other people in line began to shift uncomfortably. Harold raised his hand slightly in a gesture of peace. I'm not questioning your care for your mother. I'm just saying that losing your temper with these pharmacy workers isn't going to solve anything. They're not the enemy here. But Sarah was beyond reasoning. The stress, exhaustion, and emotional weight of caring for her dying mother while struggling financially had reached a boiling point. This stranger's unsolicited advice felt like the final insult. "Who do you think you are?" Sarah shouted, her voice echoing through the pharmacy. "Some random old man telling me how to handle my family's medical crisis? You're probably just here picking up vitamins or something while my mother could die without her heart medication. Mind your own business and stay out of mine." The entire pharmacy fell silent. Other customers stared in shock at the young woman's outburst directed at the elderly man. Harold stood quietly, his weathered face showing no anger, only a deep sadness. He had faced enemy fire and life-threatening situations with less emotional impact than this moment brought him. David the pharmacist looked up from his phone call, sensing the tension but unsure how to diffuse the situation. He had successfully reached the doctor's office and gotten approval to process Sarah's mother's prescription, but the confrontation between his customers had escalated beyond a simple disagreement. Harold looked at Sarah with the patient expression of someone who had seen too much conflict in his lifetime to be offended by harsh words from a stressed individual. "You're right," he said quietly. "I should mind my own business. I hope your mother gets her medication and feels better." Sarah felt a momentary pang of guilt at the man's gracious response, but her anger and embarrassment prevented her from backing down. "That's right. You should mind your own business. Some of us have real problems to deal with." The other customers in line exchanged uncomfortable glances. Most of them could see that both people were dealing with their own struggles, but the situation had become so tense that no one wanted to get involved. The pharmacy staff continued working, trying to maintain normalcy, while the conflict played out among their customers. As Harold stepped back to wait his turn quietly, Sarah turned back to the pharmacist, who had just hung up the phone with good news about her mother's prescription. But the damage from the confrontation had been done, and the atmosphere in the pharmacy remained charged with tension. Neither Sarah nor Harold knew that within the next few minutes, their assumptions about each other would be completely shattered, and the entire pharmacy would witness an extraordinary moment that would change how everyone thought about respect, sacrifice, and the hidden stories that every person carries with them. The pharmacist, David, cleared his throat to break the uncomfortable silence that had settled over the store. "Miss Mitchell, I have good news. The doctor's office approved the authorization, and your mother's medication will be ready in just a few minutes." Sarah nodded stiffly, still feeling the weight of everyone's stares after her outburst. She moved to the side to wait, avoiding eye contact with the elderly man she had just berated. Her hands shook slightly as she fumbled with her phone, trying to appear busy while fighting back tears of exhaustion and embarrassment. Harold took his place at the counter with quiet dignity. Despite the harsh words directed at him, he maintained his composure. Years of military service had taught him that conflicts often arose from stress and misunderstanding rather than genuine malice. He had no ill will toward the young woman who was clearly overwhelmed by her circumstances. "Good afternoon, sir." "Name?" David asked, grateful to move on to what he hoped would be a more routine transaction. "Thompson." "Harold Thompson," the elderly man replied in his measured voice. As David searched for the prescription, Harold noticed the pharmacy's memorial wall dedicated to local veterans. Photos of servicemen and women from various conflicts lined a small section near the prescription pickup area. He studied the faces quietly, some reminding him of comrades he had served with decades ago. Sarah glanced over at Harold while waiting for her prescription to be filled. Now that her anger had subsided slightly, she felt a twinge of guilt about her harsh words. The man seemed harmless enough, and she realized he had probably just been trying to help in his own way. Still, her pride prevented her from apologizing immediately. "Here we go," David said, pulling several prescription bottles from the shelf. "Metformin for diabetes, lisinopril for blood pressure, and..." He paused, looking at the computer screen with a puzzled expression. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, but there seems to be an issue with one of your prescriptions. It's showing as requiring special authorization from the VA." Harold nodded patiently. That would be the medication for the nerve damage. It's a newer drug, and the VA approval process takes time. Let me call the VA pharmacy to see if we can expedite this, David offered. It might take a few minutes. As Harold waited, Sarah found herself listening to his conversation with the pharmacist. The mention of nerve damage and the VA made her realize this man was a military veteran. She felt another pang of guilt, remembering her harsh assumption that he was just picking up vitamins. The pharmacy door chimed as several more customers entered, adding to the growing crowd. Among them was Mrs. Patterson, the elderly owner of the pharmacy, who had been running errands and decided to stop by to check on the afternoon rush. Mrs. Patterson had owned the pharmacy for over 40 years and knew many of her regular customers personally. She spotted Harold at the counter, and her face immediately brightened with recognition and respect. "Harold, how wonderful to see you," she called out warmly, making her way over to him. "How have you been feeling? Is that new medication helping with the pain from your injuries?" "Getting by, Martha," Harold replied with a genuine smile. "Some days better than others, but can't complain." Sarah overheard this exchange and felt her stomach tighten with growing regret. The casual mention of injuries in the context of VA medications was painting a picture very different from her assumptions about this man. "Mrs. Patterson turned to David behind the counter. "David, make sure Mr. Thompson gets everything he needs. This man is a local hero, though he's too modest to tell anyone about it himself." Harold looked slightly uncomfortable with the attention. "Martha, that's not necessary. Just treat me like any other customer." "Nonsense, Mrs. Patterson replied firmly. "David, did you know that Harold here received the Medal of Honor? He saved his entire platoon in Vietnam when their position was overrun, carried wounded soldiers to safety under heavy fire for over 6 hours." The pharmacy fell completely silent. Every customer and staff member turned to look at Harold, who stood with quiet dignity, clearly uncomfortable with being the center of attention. His weathered hands, which Sarah now noticed bore several scars, gripped the counter edge lightly. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. The man she had just screamed at and dismissed as having no real problems was a Medal of Honor recipient. The highest military decoration possible. Her chest tightened as she realized the magnitude of her misjudgment. "Martha, please," Harold said softly. "That was a long time ago, and I was just doing my job," Mrs. Patterson continued, unaware of the recent confrontation. "Just doing his job," he says. Harold spent 3 tours in Vietnam, came home with shrapnel in his legs and nerve damage in his arms, and has never once complained about his pain or asked for special treatment. He volunteers at the VA hospital every week, helping other veterans adjust to civilian life. David looked at Harold with newfound respect and quickly resumed working on the prescription authorization call. Other customers in the pharmacy began to murmur among themselves, many expressing amazement and respect for the humble veteran in their midst. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. This man, who had literally saved lives and served his country with distinction, had quietly tried to offer perspective on her situation, and she had not only rejected his advice, but had attacked his character. Her assumption that he couldn't understand real problems was not just wrong, it was heartbreakingly ironic. Harold noticed Sarah's distressed expression and correctly interpreted what was happening. With the same compassion he had shown throughout his life, he stepped slightly toward her. "Miss," he said quietly, "please don't feel bad about earlier. You're dealing with a lot of stress, and I could have chosen my words better." His kindness made Sarah feel even worse. She opened her mouth to apologize, but no words came out. The weight of her behavior pressed down on her, making it difficult to speak. Mrs. Patterson, sensing tension but not understanding its source, continued to share Harold's story with obvious pride. "This man has been through more hardship than most people could imagine. But he still finds time to help others. Just last week, he was at the food bank organizing donations for struggling families." Each word felt like a hammer blow to Sarah's conscience. Here was a man who had suffered significantly, served others his entire life, and continued to give back to his community despite his own physical limitations and modest income. And she had treated him with contempt for trying to offer a different perspective. Harold looked around the pharmacy and noticed how his story was affecting everyone present, particularly the young woman who had confronted him earlier. He could see her distress and wanted to find a way to ease her obvious guilt without drawing more attention to their earlier exchange. "You know what, Martha," Harold said, changing the subject diplomatically. "I notice you've added some new photos to the memorial wall. Is that young Johnson who deployed last year?" Mrs. Patterson followed his gaze to the wall. "Yes, and we just added Lisa Martinez, who completed her second deployment in Afghanistan. We're so proud of all our local service members." As the conversation shifted to other veterans, Sarah found herself studying Harold more carefully. She noticed the slight limp as he shifted his weight, probably from the shrapnel injuries Mrs. Patterson had mentioned. She saw how he held his left arm slightly stiffly, likely due to the nerve damage. Most telling of all, she observed his patient, kind demeanor, despite having every reason to be angry with her. The phone call David was making finally yielded results. "Good news, Mr. Thompson. The VA approved the authorization, and all your medications will be ready in just a moment." "Thank you for your patience," Harold replied gratefully. As David prepared Harold's prescriptions, Sarah's own medication was completed. She approached the counter to pick it up, her heart pounding as she realized she would have to stand next to the man she had so wrongly misjudged. "Here you go, Miss Mitchell," David said, handing her the prescription bag. "Please give my regards to your mother, and I hope she feels better soon." Sarah took the bag with trembling hands. She stood there for a moment, knowing she needed to say something to Harold but struggling to find words adequate for the situation. This wasn't just about apologizing for rudeness, it was about confronting her own prejudices and the assumptions she had made about a true American hero. Harold collected his medications and turned to leave, passing close to Sarah on his way out. He paused and spoke softly, so only she could hear. "Take care of your mother," he said simply. "Family is the most important thing we have." As Harold headed toward the pharmacy door, Sarah realized this might be her only chance to make things right. She had to find the courage to acknowledge her mistake and show proper respect for a man who deserved so much better than the treatment she had given him. But before she could speak, the pharmacy door suddenly burst open with such force that it startled everyone inside. What happened next would transform an already extraordinary moment into something none of them would ever forget. The pharmacy door exploded inward with such force that the bell above it rang frantically. Through the entrance marched 12 soldiers in full military dress uniforms, their polished boots striking the floor in perfect synchronization. The crisp sound of their coordinated movement echoed throughout the small pharmacy as every customer and staff member froze in stunned silence. Leading the formation was a tall officer with silver eagles on his collar, a full colonel in the United States Army. His bearing was immaculate, his uniform pristine, and his face set in an expression of serious purpose. Behind him followed 11 other soldiers of various ranks, all moving with the precision that comes only from years of military training. Harold had stopped dead in his tracks near the door, his prescription bag clutched in his hand. His face showed complete bewilderment as he tried to process why an entire military unit had just entered Patterson's pharmacy. The other customers pressed themselves against the walls and shelves, making room for the impressive formation that had taken over the small space. The colonel's eyes swept the pharmacy until they locked onto Harold. Recognition flashed across his stern features, followed immediately by what could only be described as reverence. Without hesitation, the entire formation moved toward the elderly veteran with the same precision they had shown entering the building. "Sergeant Major Thompson," the colonel called out in a voice that carried the authority of command, but also unmistakable respect. "Sir, we've been looking for you." Harold's confusion deepened. "I'm sorry, Colonel, but I think there's been some mistake. I retired 30 years ago, and I was never a sergeant major." The colonel smiled, the first break in his serious demeanor since entering the pharmacy. "Sir, with all due respect, you are mistaken about your current rank. As of today, you have been posthumously promoted to sergeant major by special order of the Secretary of the Army." "Posthumously?" Harold asked, looking bewildered. "But I'm not dead." "No, sir. You are very much alive," the colonel replied with genuine warmth. "But the promotion recognizes service that should have been acknowledged decades ago. Would you mind if my soldiers and I took a few minutes of your time?" Harold nodded slowly, still processing the surreal situation. The other pharmacy customers remained transfixed by the extraordinary scene unfolding before them. Sarah found herself pressed against the prescription counter, watching in amazement as the true scope of Harold's significance became apparent. The colonel gestured to one of his soldiers, who stepped forward carrying a large folder. "Sergeant Major Thompson, what I'm about to tell you may come as a surprise. 2 months ago, our unit was researching historical records for a documentary about Medal of Honor recipients. During our investigation, we discovered that your service record contained several significant errors and omissions." Harold listened intently, his face showing the same calm attention he had maintained throughout his confrontation with Sarah earlier. "Sir," the colonel continued, "according to newly declassified documents, your actions in Vietnam went far beyond what was originally reported. You didn't just save your platoon once, you saved them 3 separate times over a period of 6 months. The official records show that you single-handedly held off enemy forces while calling in air support, rescued wounded soldiers under heavy fire on multiple occasions, and voluntarily extended your tour to train new soldiers in survival techniques." The soldier with the folder opened it and began reading from official documents. "Furthermore, sir, after your service in Vietnam, you were deployed twice more in classified operations that couldn't be acknowledged at the time. Your total combat service was not the 3 tours originally recorded, but 7 tours across 3 different conflicts." Harold's face went pale. "How is that possible? I never—" "Sir," the colonel interrupted gently, "much of your service was classified at levels that even you weren't fully briefed on. You were part of special operations that required compartmentalized information. The full scope of your contributions to our nation's security is only now being properly recognized." Mrs. Patterson, who had been listening with growing amazement, spoke up from behind the prescription counter. "Harold, is this true? You never told me about any additional deployments." Harold looked genuinely confused. "I remember some assignments that seemed different, but I was told they were training exercises or routine missions. I never knew." The colonel nodded understandingly. "That was intentional, sir. The nature of your assignments required absolute secrecy, even from the participants themselves in some cases. What matters now is that the Army is finally able to properly honor your complete service record." One of the younger soldiers stepped forward, carrying a wooden presentation case. The colonel took it and opened it carefully, revealing a collection of military decorations and ribbons that caught the pharmacy's fluorescent lights and seemed to glow. "Sergeant Major Thompson," the colonel announced formally, "in addition to your existing Medal of Honor, you are hereby awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 silver stars, 4 bronze stars with Combat V devices, and the Combat Infantry Badge with 3 stars, indicating your multiple combat deployments." The pharmacy erupted in spontaneous applause from the customers and staff who had witnessed this extraordinary moment. Harold stood in stunned silence, staring at the decorations that represented a lifetime of service he had never fully understood the scope of. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she watched the ceremony. This man, whom she had berated for not understanding real problems, had literally spent decades of his life serving in the most dangerous situations imaginable to protect people like her and her mother. Her earlier words echoed in her mind with devastating clarity. The colonel wasn't finished. "Sir, there's one more thing. The Army has also approved a special back pay adjustment for your previously unacknowledged service. You've been underpaid for your military pension for 30 years. He handed Harold an envelope. "This contains a check for the adjusted amount, plus interest. It should help with any medical expenses or other needs you might have." Harold opened the envelope with shaking hands. His eyes widened as he saw the amount, and for the first time since the soldiers had entered, his composure cracked slightly. This is enough to cover my medical bills for years. I can finally afford the physical therapy my doctor recommended." The human impact of the moment was profound. Here was a man who had struggled financially while dealing with service-related injuries, never asking for help or special treatment, suddenly receiving the recognition and support he had earned through decades of sacrifice. Sarah could no longer contain herself. She pushed through the crowd of customers and approached Harold, her face streaked with tears. The colonel and his soldiers watched curiously as the young woman they didn't know approached their honored veteran. "Sir," Sarah began, her voice breaking with emotion, "I need to tell you something, and everyone here needs to hear it." Harold looked at her with the same kind eyes that had shown no anger even during her earlier outburst. "Before you all arrived," Sarah continued, addressing both Harold and the soldiers, "I had an argument with this man. I yelled at him. I told him he didn't understand real problems. I suggested he was just some random old man who couldn't possibly know what it was like to face a real crisis." The colonel's eyebrows rose, but Harold placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Miss, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is," Sarah insisted. "I was wrong. Completely. Horribly wrong. I was stressed about my mother's medication and took it out on someone who was trying to help. I had no idea who you were or what you'd been through, but that's no excuse. You deserved respect simply because you're a human being, and I failed to give it to you." She turned to face the colonel and the other soldiers. "This man showed me kindness and patience, even after I treated him terribly. He tried to defuse the situation and wished my mother well despite my behavior. If this is what our military heroes are like, then we're lucky to have them." Harold's eyes moistened as he looked at Sarah. "Young lady, you're dealing with stress that would break most people. Taking care of a sick parent while working multiple jobs isn't easy. I should have been more understanding of your situation." "No," Sarah said firmly. "You were perfect. You were everything I should have been: patient, kind, and focused on solving problems instead of creating them." The colonel, who had been watching this exchange with growing interest, stepped forward. "Miss, may I ask your name?" "Sarah Mitchell," she replied. "Miss Mitchell, what you've just done takes tremendous courage. It's easy to apologize when no one is watching. It's much harder to do it in front of a crowd. I think it just in the product. We've don't one stay to a Arfrold. We've don't one stay to data con round. Arfrom.com. Especially to acknowledge that you misjudged a military hero." He turned to his soldiers. "Gentlemen, this is what honor looks like in civilian life. Miss Mitchell has just demonstrated the kind of integrity and accountability that we strive for in the military." One of the younger soldiers spoke up. "Sir, if I may, Sergeant Major Thompson's reaction to being mistreated shows the same character we've been reading about in his service record. He responded with grace under pressure, just like he did in combat." Mrs. Patterson, who had been watching everything with tears in her eyes, approached the group. "Colonel, if I may say something, Harold has been coming to my pharmacy for 15 years, and I've never once heard him complain about anything or ask for special treatment. Even today, when he was clearly in pain and waiting in a long line, he was patient with everyone." The colonel nodded approvingly. "That's consistent with everything we've learned about the sergeant major's character. It's also why this recognition is so important. Heroes shouldn't have to wait 30 years for proper acknowledgement." Harold looked around the pharmacy at all the faces watching him with respect and admiration. "I appreciate this more than I can say, but I want everyone to remember something important. I'm not special because of these decorations. Every person who puts on a uniform and serves their country is a hero. And every person who takes care of their family, works hard, and tries to do right by others is also a hero in their own way." He looked directly at Sarah. "Including you, Miss Mitchell. Taking care of your mother while working multiple jobs and still finding the strength to apologize when you're wrong, that's heroic too." The colonel prepared to conclude the ceremony. "Sergeant Major Thompson, this has been one of the most meaningful presentations I've ever had the honor to conduct. It's rare that we get to see the immediate impact of proper recognition." As the soldiers prepared to leave, they each shook hands with Harold, and several took photos with him at Mrs. Patterson's insistence. The other pharmacy customers approached one by one to thank him for his service and express their amazement at what they had witnessed. Sarah was the last to say goodbye. "Sergeant Major Thompson," she said, using his new rank with obvious pride, "would it be okay if I brought my mother to meet you sometime? I think she'd be honored to thank you in person for your service." Harold smiled warmly. I'd like that very much. And please, call me Harold. Friends don't need to use military titles. As the soldiers filed out of the pharmacy with the same precision they had shown entering, the customers and staff stood in respectful silence. The ordinary Tuesday afternoon had been transformed into something extraordinary, a moment where assumptions were shattered, character was revealed, and true honor was finally recognized. Sarah picked up her mother's prescription and walked toward the door, but she paused to look back at Harold one more time. He was talking quietly with Mrs. Patterson, probably trying to downplay the significance of what had just happened. Just as he had undoubtedly downplayed his service for decades, in that moment, Sarah understood that she had witnessed something far more important than a military ceremony. She had seen what real character looked like: quiet strength, selfless service, and the grace to forgive those who don't immediately recognize these qualities in others. The lesson would stay with her forever. Every person carries invisible stories of struggle, sacrifice, and strength. The elderly man in line ahead of you might be a war hero. The stressed parent might be fighting battles you can't see. The quiet neighbor might be changing the world in ways you never imagined. As Sarah left the pharmacy to deliver her mother's medication, she carried with her not just the prescription, but also a renewed faith in the power of human dignity, respect, and the extraordinary ordinary heroes who walk among us every day.